They say blood is thicker than water, but in my family, blood was just an excuse to draw a target on my back. For years, every single Sunday dinner was a trial. My mother would look at me with pity, my sister would flash that patronizing smile, and my brother-in-law loved to make the same cruel joke. Still eating for one, huh? I took the condescension, the quiet laughs, and the constant reminders that I was 35, single, and running out of time. They thought I was the lonely, desperate daughter who couldn't keep a man. They thought I was lagging behind while they all lived their perfect lives. But what they didn't realize was that my silence wasn't shame, it was restraint. I held the one truth that could tear their entire world apart. And when they finally pushed me too far at Thanksgiving dinner, I didn't cry. I just passed the gravy and spoke. My name is Clara Vance, and at 35 years old, I was officially designated as the resident failure of the Vance family tree. To my mother, being single past 30 wasn't just a personal choice. It was a tragedy, a public embarrassment she had to explain away at her weekly bridge games. Every single Sunday roast followed the exact same agonizing script. I'd take my seat at the end of the long mahogany dining table, right next to the salt shaker, and brace myself. My mother would set down the platter, look at my empty side, and sigh with that practiced, theatrical pity. Still eating for one, Clara? You know, my friend's son just got divorced. He has 3 kids, but at this stage, beggars can't be choosers. My brother-in-law would chuckle into his wine glass, and my sister would flash that soft, patronizing smile that said, "Poor thing." I kept my head down, quietly cutting my chicken, taking the condescension and the subtle digs about my ticking clock. I let them think I was the lonely, desperate daughter lagging behind. What they didn't realize was that my silence wasn't shame. It was just patience. At the head of the table sat my younger sister, Vanessa, and her husband, Mark. In my family's eyes, they were royalty. Vanessa was 32, glowing with the quiet confidence of someone who had followed every traditional rule, and Mark was the high-flying corporate hotshot who never missed a chance to show off. He wore a custom-tailored suit to a casual family dinner, his gold Rolex catching the chandelier light every time he reached for the wine bottle. "We're thinking of upgrading the country club membership," Mark announced, adjusting his cuff. "The baseline tier just doesn't offer the networking access I need for my portfolio." My mother practically beamed, pouring Mark another glass. "It's just wonderful to see a real man taking care of his family. You're building a true legacy, Mark." Then, without missing a beat, her eyes flicked over to me. "It's a shame, Clara. If you'd prioritized finding a solid man instead of drowning yourself in your little job, you could have had a life like this too. But I suppose some women just aren't built to be chosen." Vanessa patted my hand condescendingly. "Don't be mean, Mom. Clara's comfortable in her little world." What my family called my little job was actually Vance Asset Management, a firm I had founded 7 years ago that now quietly handled high-net-worth portfolios. I didn't drive a sports car or flash designer labels, but while they thought I was barely paying rent, I had already fully paid off my own home and secretly bought out the mortgage on our parents' house to keep them from losing it years ago. But the real secret, the one that made my blood run cold every time Mark opened his mouth, had happened 6 months earlier. Mark had shown up at my office trembling, sweat bleeding through his pristine collar. His booming portfolio was a disaster of leveraged debt and failed crypto bets. He was weeks away from total financial ruin, facing lawsuits and public humiliation that would destroy his marriage and bankrupt his life. He had begged me on his knees. He cried, pleading with me not to tell Vanessa, begging for a lifeline. Because I loved my sister, I wrote him a personal check for $150,000 to cover his debts, tied to a strict, legally binding repayment contract. I kept his secret. I took his fake smiles every Sunday. But sitting at that table, watching him act like a king while living on my charity, my patience was wearing paper thin. The breaking point arrived 5 months later at Thanksgiving. The entire extended family was squeezed around the extended dining table, aunts, uncles, and cousins all drinking expensive wine that Mark had loudly announced cost $200 a bottle. Naturally, he made sure everyone knew he was paying for the holiday spread. Halfway through the meal, Mark stood up, glass in hand, to make his annual toast. He spoke grandly about his soaring investments, his plans to buy a second home in the Hamptons, and how blessed he was to be the pillar of the family. Then, as if driven by pure habit, his eyes landed on me at the edge of the table. To family, Mark raised his glass, flashing a smug smile. And to Clara. You know, Clara, we're all praying 2026 is finally the year you find yourself a man to take care of you. It's hard watching you drift along with no real direction or security. Vanessa chimed in with a light laugh. Honestly, Clara, my friend knows a lovely 50-year-old divorcee. He has a few red flags, but at 35, beggars can't be choosers, right? You don't want to end up alone with cats. The table erupted into polite chuckles. Mark took a slow sip of his wine, looking thoroughly pleased with himself. I slowly set my fork down, picked up my napkin, and dabbed the corners of my mouth. The grace period was officially over. I laid my napkin down flat on the table, the quiet fabric striking the wood like a gavel. The room settled into an awkward hush as I looked directly at Mark. That's very generous of you, Mark, I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. Though I'm curious, when you buy that second home in the Hamptons, will you be funding it with another loan from your lonely, directionless sister-in-law? Mark's glass froze halfway to his lips. Color drained from his face so fast it was like watching a ghost manifest in real time. Clara, what are you talking about? My mother snapped, scowling at me. Don't be jealous and ruin dinner. I'm talking about the $150,000 Mark begged me for 6 months ago. I continued smoothly, leaning back in my chair. The money that saved him from a public foreclosure, a massive lawsuit, and bankruptcy. The money he signed a legally binding promissory note to pay back, which he hasn't touched a dime of. Vanessa blinked, looking between her husband and me. Mark, what is she talking about? She's lying. She's out of her mind. Mark stammered, his hands shaking so violently his wine sloshed over the crystal glass. She's just bitter, because she has no one. I reached into my handbag, pulled out a folded packet of paper, and slid it directly across the mahogany table. Page 3 has your signature, Mark. And page 4 shows the bank transfer directly into your account. The silence in the room was absolute. My mother snatched the papers off the table first, her eyes scanning the official bank stamps, the legal headers of Vance Asset Management, and Mark's panicked, sloppy signature at the bottom. Her face went entirely pale. Vanessa grabbed the document out of her hands, her breath catching in her throat as she read the numbers. $150,000? She whispered, staring at Mark. You told me that came from your quarterly bonus. Mark looked around the room like a trapped animal, sweating profusely through his $2,000 suit. He tried to speak, to spin another lie, but no words came out. The smug, arrogant facade he had maintained for years crumbled into dust right in front of everyone he had lied to. You like to talk about legacy, Mark, I said, setting my glass down. But the reality is that your entire flashy lifestyle, the suits, the club membership, the wine you're boasting about right now, was funded by the spinster sitting at the end of the table. And as for the promissory note, the 6-month grace period ended yesterday. If the first payment isn't in my firm's account by Monday morning at 9, my legal team will file for immediate asset seizure. I stood up, smoothed down my sweater, and picked up my coat. The dining room was dead silent. No quiet chuckles, no pitying sighs, no passive-aggressive advice about my ticking clock. Just the hollow sound of my sister weeping and Mark staring at the table in absolute ruin. Thank you for dinner, Mom, I said softly. The turkey was lovely. I walked out the front door into the crisp, cool evening air, taking a deep, clean breath. For 35 years, I thought I needed their approval to feel complete. But as I got into my car, driving back to a life built entirely on my own strength, I realized the truth. I wasn't single because I was unwanted. I was single because I refused to settle for a life built on fragile lies. I was free, and that was worth more than any seat at their table.